I never thought my life could change so dramatically with just one look. Terry Mitchell was sitting in our conference room with my dad, but his eyes were fixed solely on me when I brought in the coffee. A 28-year-old successful businessman, and I was just a 22-year-old college graduate trying to figure out my next steps in life. The morning had started like any other. Dad had been preparing for an important business meeting, shuffling through papers and making phone calls. I'd offered to help by setting up the conference room and preparing refreshments. Anything to stay busy and avoid thinking about my uncertain future. When the doorbell rang, I volunteered to answer it, expecting just another boring business associate in a gray suit. But Terry Mitchell was nothing like the usual parade of middle-aged men who came to discuss contracts with my father. When I opened the door, I was struck by his presence immediately. Tall, confident, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of green eyes that seemed to see right through you. He wore his expensive suit like it was tailored specifically for his athletic frame, and when he smiled, it was the kind of smile that made you forget what you were supposed to be doing. "You must be Roger," he said, extending his hand. "I've heard so much about you. This is my son, Roger." Dad introduced me properly when we reached the conference room. Terry's hand touched mine during the handshake, and I felt like an electric current had run through my entire body. His grip was firm, confident, and he wasn't looking away from me like most people did after a polite acknowledgement. "Nice to meet you, Roger." His voice was deep, almost husky, with an undertone that made my stomach flutter unexpectedly. I quickly pulled my hand back, suddenly aware that I was staring. For the next 2 hours, I tried to hide in the kitchen, but every time I glanced toward the living room, Terry was looking in my direction. Dad was discussing business matters, talking about contracts and partnerships, quarterly projections and market expansions, but Terry's focus seemed to be elsewhere. On me. I found myself making excuses to walk past the conference room. First, I needed to get something from the kitchen. Then I remembered I'd left my phone in the living room. Each time, those intense green eyes would track my movement, and I'd feel heat rising in my cheeks like a teenager with an embarrassing crush. "Your son seems very intelligent," I heard Terry tell Dad during one of my eavesdropping sessions. "Maybe he could help with our next project." Fresh perspective is always valuable in business. I dropped my coffee cup. The crash echoed through the house, and I scrambled to clean up the mess, my hands shaking slightly. What was happening here? Dad got excited immediately, launching into a proud father speech about my recent graduation and how I was looking for opportunities to gain real-world experience. "Absolutely. Roger needs the experience, and he's always been interested in business strategy." Terry smiled, but that smile seemed directed at me rather than my father. Even from the kitchen, I could feel the intensity of his gaze. "I'll personally ensure that he's well taken care of." The way he said those words, with a slight pause and emphasis that Dad didn't seem to catch, made my pulse quicken. There was something underneath the professional politeness, something that felt dangerous and thrilling at the same time. When Terry finally left that evening, he made a point of saying goodbye to me personally. "It was really nice meeting you, Roger. I have a feeling we're going to be seeing a lot more of each other." He handed me his business card, and when our fingers brushed during the exchange, I swear I felt that same electric sensation again. "Call me if you have any questions about the business world, anytime." That night I lay in bed unable to sleep, tossing and turning as my mind replayed every moment of our interaction. Terry Mitchell's face, his intense green eyes, his confident smile, the way he'd looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the room. Everything kept spinning through my thoughts like a movie I couldn't turn off. I tried to rationalize what I was feeling. He was just being friendly, networking, maybe trying to make a good impression on Dad by showing interest in his family. But deep down I knew there was something more to those looks. Something in the way he'd spoken to me that went beyond professional courtesy. "You're being crazy, Roger," I told myself, staring at the ceiling. "He's Dad's business partner. He's probably just being polite." But even as I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that Terry Mitchell had been flirting with me. The thought should have been uncomfortable, maybe even alarming. Instead, it sent a thrill through me that I didn't want to examine too closely. When I finally did fall asleep, my dreams were filled with green eyes and that dangerous smile. I woke up the next morning feeling confused and strangely energized, like something had shifted in my world overnight. I was checking my phone over breakfast when Dad's message appeared. Terry sent you a job offer. You need to go to his office tomorrow for an interview. I stared at the screen, reading the message 3 times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. A job offer? Already? We'd barely spoken for more than a few minutes, and he was offering me a position at his company? I threw my phone onto the bed, my heart racing. This definitely wasn't a coincidence. Whatever had happened during that brief meeting yesterday, whatever those looks and carefully chosen words had meant, Terry Mitchell was making sure our paths would cross again. The rational part of my brain was telling me to be cautious, to treat this as a normal business opportunity and nothing more. But the other part, the part that had been awakened by those intense green eyes and that confident smile, was already counting down the hours until I would see him again. I picked up his business card from my nightstand, running my thumb over the embossed lettering. Terry Mitchell, CEO, Mitchell & Associates. Tomorrow, I would be walking into his world, his territory. And despite all my attempts at rational thinking, I couldn't wait. Terry's office building was the most impressive tower in downtown, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky like a monument to success. I stood in the elevator watching the numbers climb to the 32nd floor, my heart beating like I was about to perform on stage rather than just starting a new job. This is just work, I told myself, checking my reflection in the mirrored elevator walls. Stay professional. Don't read into things that aren't there. But when the elevator doors opened, Terry was standing right there as if he'd been waiting specifically for my arrival. He wore another perfectly tailored black suit, his blonde hair styled with just enough casual messiness to look effortlessly attractive, and those same intense eyes that had haunted my dreams. Right on time, he said, checking his expensive watch with a smile that made my stomach flip. I like punctuality in my employees. The way he emphasized my employees sent a possessive thrill through me that I tried to ignore. He gestured for me to follow him, and I noticed how other employees in the hallway straightened up when they saw him, greeting him with a mixture of respect and barely concealed nervousness. Terry Mitchell was clearly someone who commanded attention and respect in his professional environment. His personal assistant, Sarah, a sharp-looking woman in her 30s, gave me a comprehensive tour of the company, but Terry walked alongside us the entire time, which seemed unusual for a CEO to personally guide a new intern around. In every department we visited, he made a point of introducing me personally, as if I were some kind of special guest rather than just another entry-level employee. Roger will be working closely with me, he told everyone we met. And each time he said it, that phrase very closely seemed to carry extra weight. I want to make sure he gets the full experience of how we operate here. I noticed the curious glances from other employees, probably wondering why the CEO was taking such personal interest in a new intern. I was wondering the same thing, though part of me was starting to suspect the answer. The tour ended at Terry's corner office, which was exactly what you'd expect from a successful CEO. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. Expensive art decorated the walls, and everything from the leather furniture to the crystal paperweights screamed success and good taste. Impressive, isn't it? Terry asked, noticing me taking in the view. I've worked hard to get here, started from nothing, built this company from the ground up. There was pride in his voice, but also something else. He was showing off, I realized, trying to impress me. It's amazing, I said honestly. You must be very proud of what you've accomplished. I am, but success means nothing if you don't have someone to share it with. The comment hung in the air between us, loaded with implication. I pretended to study a painting on the wall, trying to process what he'd just said. Lunch break came sooner than expected, and instead of being directed to the employee cafeteria, Terry invited me to his private office. Sarah brought in gourmet sandwiches and coffee, then discreetly closed the door behind her as she left. So, Terry said, settling into his chair and leaning forward slightly, how was your first morning? Overwhelming? A little, I admitted, trying to keep my voice steady. Everyone seems very professional. It's a well-run company. Good. I pride myself on maintaining high standards. He paused, studying my face with those penetrating green eyes. But I want to be honest with you about something. Rod, my breath caught in my throat. What do you mean? Terry stood up and moved around his desk, coming to lean against it directly in front of my chair. The casual movement brought him much closer than was strictly professional. Close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and undeniably masculine, that made my head swim slightly. "I didn't hire you just because of your qualifications," he said, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "Though they are impressive. Your father spoke very highly of your academic achievements." "Then why?" I managed to ask, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. "'Cause I've been attracted to you since the moment you opened your front door yesterday." The words hung between us like a challenge, and I'm usually very good at getting what I want. I should have stood up, should have made some excuse, and left the office immediately. This was completely inappropriate, not to mention complicated given his business relationship with my father. But instead, I found myself frozen in place, caught between panic and a thrill I didn't want to acknowledge. "Terry," I started to say, finally managing to stand up and take a step back. "I know this is complicated," he continued, moving closer again. "Your father is my business partner. I respect him tremendously, and I would never do anything to jeopardize our professional relationship. But what I'm feeling for you, it's not something I can just ignore." My back hit the window and suddenly Terry was right there, one hand braced against the glass beside my head. He wasn't touching me, but he was close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. "Tell me, Roger," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you feel it too? This connection between us?" I couldn't speak. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it, and every nerve in my body was hyper-aware of his proximity. The smart thing would have been to deny it, to establish professional boundaries and insist we keep things strictly business. But looking into his eyes, seeing the genuine intensity there alongside the obvious desire, I couldn't bring myself to lie. I started, then stopped, unable to form coherent words. Terry smiled, a slow, satisfied expression that told me he'd gotten his answer even without words. "Think about it," he said, finally stepping back and giving me space to breathe again. "But don't think too long. I'm not known for my patience when it comes to something I really want." He returned to his desk as if nothing had happened, becoming the consummate professional again. "Sarah will show you to your workspace. Welcome to Mitchell & Associates, Roger. I think you're going to find working here very educational." As I left his office on unsteady legs, I realized that my life had just become infinitely more complicated, and despite knowing better, despite all the rational reasons why this was a terrible idea, I couldn't wait to see what would happen next. Dad had invited Terry for dinner, and I spent the entire afternoon alternating between hiding in my room and obsessively checking my appearance in the mirror. I told myself I was just being polite, wanting to look presentable for a family dinner, but deep down I knew I was hoping to catch that same intense look in Terry's eyes that had left me breathless in his office. When the doorbell rang at 7 o'clock sharp, I volunteered to answer it, my heart already racing before I even opened the door. Terry stood on our front porch looking effortlessly attractive in smart casual attire. A white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, dark jeans that fit him perfectly, and that same confident smile that had been haunting my thoughts for days. "Good evening, Roger," he said, his voice carrying that same intimate undertone I'd noticed before. "You look very nice tonight." The compliment sent warmth spreading through my chest, and I had to remind myself that my parents were just in the next room. "Thank you. Come in, Dad's been looking forward to continuing your business discussion." But even as I said the words, I noticed how Terry's eyes lingered on me, taking in my appearance with obvious appreciation. I'd chosen my clothes carefully, a navy blue sweater that Mom always said brought out my eyes, and my best jeans. From Terry's expression, the effort hadn't gone unnoticed. Mom had outdone herself with dinner, preparing her famous pot roast with all the trimmings. As we sat around the dining room table, the conversation initially revolved around business matters, quarterly projections, expansion plans, market analysis, but I noticed how Terry kept steering the discussion to include me, asking for my opinions on everything from social media marketing strategies to generational differences in business approaches. "Roger, what do you think about the way younger consumers respond to traditional advertising?" Terry asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. "Do you think companies like mine need to completely overhaul their marketing strategies?" It was a thoughtful question, one that showed he valued my perspective despite my lack of professional experience. As I answered, explaining my thoughts on authentic brand engagement and the importance of social responsibility in modern business, I could feel Terry's attention focused completely on me. "That's a very insightful observation," he said when I finished. "You have a natural understanding of market psychology. That's not something that can be taught in business school." Dad beamed with pride. "I always said Roger had a good head for business. Maybe he gets it from his old man." "Perhaps," Terry agreed, but his eyes never left my face. "Though I think Roger has his own unique perspective that's entirely his own." Mom, ever the observant hostess, noticed the attention Terry was paying me. "Terry, you're very thoughtful about Roger's career development," she said with a warm smile. "It's rare to find employers who take such personal interest in their young employees." Terry's smile in response was perfectly polite, but I caught the slightly guilty look that flashed across his features. "Roger is special," he said carefully. "I'm personally invested in making sure he succeeds." The words carried a double meaning that made my cheeks warm, and I quickly focused on my dinner to avoid meeting anyone's eyes. But I could feel Terry watching me, could sense his amusement at my reaction. After dinner, while Mom was clearing the table and Dad was getting his business files from his office, Terry found me alone in the hallway. He approached slowly, casually, but there was nothing casual about the intensity in his green eyes. "I have a small business gathering at my house tomorrow evening," he said quietly, his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry to the kitchen. "Your father is invited, of course. But I specifically want you there. I'd like to have a private conversation with you." The way he said private conversations sent a shiver down my spine. "Terry, this isn't right," I whispered back, glancing toward the kitchen to make sure Mom wasn't listening. "Dad trusts you. He considers you a friend as well as a business partner." "I would never hurt your father," Terry said, his expression becoming serious. "But I can't stay away from you, Roger. I've tried, believe me, but it's impossible." He moved closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne again. That intoxicating scent that seemed to scramble my thoughts. "And you can't tell me you don't feel something when you're around me. I can see it in your eyes. The way you blush when I look at you. The way your breath changes when I get close." I was silent because he was absolutely right. Every word he'd said was true and we both knew it. "Tomorrow evening. 7 sharp," he said, stepping back as we heard Dad's footsteps approaching. "Wear something nice. I want to impress you properly." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of polite conversation and business discussion, but I was barely present for any of it. My mind kept replaying Terry's words, the promise in his voice, the way he'd looked at me like I was the only person in the world who mattered. That night I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, really looking at myself for the first time in a long while. Was I really attracted to Terry Mitchell, my father's business partner? A man 6 years older than me, someone who could complicate our family's life in ways I couldn't even imagine. But as I thought about the way he looked at me, the genuine interest he showed in my thoughts and opinions, the careful way he'd been pursuing me despite the complicated circumstances, I realized my heart had already made the decision. The reflection staring back at me looked different somehow. Older, more aware, like someone on the verge of making a choice that would change everything. Tomorrow evening, I would go to Terry's house. I would have that private conversation he wanted. And despite all the rational reasons why it was a terrible idea, I couldn't wait to see what he had to say. Terry's house was located in one of the most upscale neighborhoods in the city, a stunning example of modern architecture surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than most people's annual salaries. I arrived at 7:15, deliberately 15 minutes late because I didn't want to seem too eager, though my racing heartbeat suggested that ship had already sailed. When I rang the doorbell, Terry opened the door almost immediately, as if he'd been watching for my arrival from the window. The thought that he might have been as anxious about this evening as I was sent a thrill through me that I tried to suppress. "Parents didn't come?" I asked, looking around as if I expected to see Dad's car in the driveway. Actually, Terry hesitated for just a moment, and I caught something that might have been guilt flashing across his features. "Your father had a last-minute meeting come up. He sent his regrets." I realized with a mixture of excitement and terror that I was completely alone with Terry in his house. Was this planned or just a convenient coincidence? Knowing Terry's determined personality from our brief interactions, I suspected it might be the former. "Don't look so nervous," Terry said with that devastating smile, leading me inside. "I promise I won't bite, unless you want me to." The comment made me blush furiously, and I could see from Terry's expression that he'd noticed my reaction and was pleased by it. His house was everything I'd expected from a successful CEO: sophisticated, expensive, filled with modern art and designer furniture that probably cost more than my college tuition. The living room was set up like a scene from a romantic movie. Soft jazz music played from hidden speakers, the lighting was dim and intimate, and Terry had prepared wine glasses on the coffee table. Everything about the setting suggested this evening had been carefully planned. "I wanted to cook dinner for you myself," Terry said, leading me toward the dining room. "Show off my culinary skills. I hope you like pasta." Dinner was homemade linguine, with what had to be the most delicious sauce I'd ever tasted. I was surprised to discover that Terry was genuinely talented in the kitchen, though I supposed I shouldn't have been shocked that someone as accomplished as him would excel at whatever he put his mind to. Throughout the meal, our conversation was surprisingly casual and comfortable. Terry asked about my college experience, my interests outside of business, my thoughts on everything from travel to books to music. He was an excellent listener, asking follow-up questions that showed he was genuinely interested in my answers rather than just making polite small talk. But underneath the pleasant dinner conversation, there was an undercurrent of tension that neither of us could ignore. Every time Terry refilled my wine glass, his fingers would brush against mine. When he reached across the table to adjust the candle, I caught him watching my face in the flickering light. The attraction that had been simmering between us since our first meeting was becoming impossible to ignore. "Roger," Terry finally said after we'd finished dessert, his voice becoming serious and intense. "I need to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully." I set down my wine glass, my pulse quickening at the change in his tone. The playful, charming Terry from dinner was being replaced by someone more serious, more vulnerable. "For the past few weeks, I've been thinking about you constantly," he began, his green eyes fixed on mine with unwavering intensity. "At the office, during meetings, even when I'm supposed to be concentrating on important business decisions. This isn't normal for me, Roger." "Terry," I started to interrupt, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish, please," he continued, his voice becoming softer but more urgent. "I know this situation is incredibly complicated. Your father is not just my business partner but someone I genuinely respect and consider a friend. You're younger than me, just starting your career while I'm already established in mine. Logically, I should maintain my distance and keep our relationship strictly professional." He stood up from his chair and moved around the table to crouch in front of me, bringing his face level with mine. His proximity made my breathing shallow, and I could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes that I'd noticed that first day in his office. "But when it comes to you, I'm not driven by logic," Terry said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm driven by feelings I've never experienced before. What I feel for you isn't just physical attraction, though that's certainly part of it. I want to know everything about you, Roger. I want to take care of you, spoil you, be the person you turn to when you need support or comfort." My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. "What about Dad?" I managed to whisper. "What about your business relationship with him?" "We'll be careful," Terry said, reaching up to gently touch my cheek with his fingertips. "At least initially, until we're both sure this is serious and worth the potential complications. But right now, Roger, I just need to know how you feel. I need to hear you say it." Looking into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability there alongside the desire, I felt my carefully constructed defenses completely crumble. Everything I'd been telling myself about staying professional, about not getting involved in a complicated situation, about protecting my family's relationship with Terry, all of it melted away under the intensity of his gaze. "Yes," I said, my voice barely audible even in the quiet room. Terry's smile was genuine and relieved, like he'd been holding his breath waiting for my answer. "Yes to what, specifically?" he asked, though his tone suggested he knew exactly what I meant. "Yes to this. To you. To whatever this is between us." Terry moved closer, his hand sliding from my cheek to the back of my neck. "Are you sure? Once we cross this line, there's no going back to pretending this is just professional." Instead of answering with words, I leaned forward slightly, closing the distance between us. Terry's eyes fluttered closed as our lips met in what was technically my first kiss with a man, though it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, but when I didn't pull away, Terry deepened it, his other hand coming up to frame my face. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathing hard. "No more pretending," Terry whispered against my lips. "But we'll be smart about this. I won't do anything to hurt you or your family." As I looked into his eyes, I realized that whatever happened next, my life had just changed in a fundamental way. And for the first time since this whole situation started, I wasn't afraid of what that might mean. The next 3 weeks of maintaining a secret relationship felt like living in two completely different worlds. At the office, Terry was the consummate professional, treating me like any other employee during meetings, maintaining appropriate distance during work hours, and never giving any indication that our relationship had moved beyond professional boundaries. But beneath that professional facade, we found ways to steal moments together that made my heart race and my productivity suffer. Quick kisses in empty elevators between floors, lingering touches when he handed me documents in conference rooms, heated looks across crowded meetings that made me forget what I was supposed to be taking notes about. The most thrilling moments were the late evening phone calls, when I was home and Terry was supposedly working late at the office. His voice would drop to that intimate tone I was becoming addicted to as he told me about his day, asked about mine, and gradually steered the conversation toward more personal topics. "I keep thinking about that night at my house," he said during one of these calls, his voice soft and warm through the phone. "About how you looked in the candlelight, how you tasted when I kissed you." "Terry," I whispered, glancing toward my bedroom door to make sure it was closed. "What if someone overhears? Then I guess I'll have to be more creative about finding ways to tell you how much I miss you." Terry began taking me to expensive restaurants around the city, always choosing places with private booths where we could talk openly without worry about being seen or overheard. He was attentive and caring in ways I'd never experienced before, remembering small details about things I mentioned in passing and surprising me with thoughtful gestures. "You're different," Terry told me one evening over dinner at an upscale Italian restaurant. "I used to prefer casual relationships, keeping things simple and uncomplicated. But with you, I find myself thinking about the future in ways I never have before." The admission sent warmth spreading through my chest, but it also made me realize how serious this was becoming. What had started as attraction and curiosity was developing into genuine feelings that felt deeper and more significant than anything I'd experienced before. But maintaining the secret was becoming increasingly difficult, especially at home. Dad began noticing that I was working late hours at Terry's office more frequently than seemed normal for an entry-level position. "Terry isn't overworking you, is he?" Dad asked one morning over breakfast, his voice carrying a note of concern. "I know he's demanding as a boss, but you've been staying late almost every night this week." "No, Dad," I replied, trying to keep my voice casual despite the guilt twisting in my stomach. "Actually, I'm really enjoying the work. Terry gives me interesting projects that are helping me learn a lot about the business." It wasn't technically a lie. I was learning about business, and I was staying late at the office. I just wasn't mentioning that most of those late evenings involved Terry teaching me things that had nothing to do with quarterly reports and market analysis. Mom was becoming more observant as well, and her maternal intuition was proving to be dangerously accurate. "Roger, you seem very happy lately," she commented one afternoon while we were both in the kitchen. "More relaxed and content than I've seen you since graduation. Any particular reason for the good mood?" I quickly changed the subject, but I could see the thoughtful look in Mom's eyes that suggested she wasn't going to let the matter drop entirely. The most dangerous moment came when Terry visited our house for another business meeting with Dad. I was sitting in the living room when he arrived, and for just a split second when our eyes met, the professional mask slipped completely. The look that passed between us was intimate and heated, full of the memory of stolen kisses and whispered conversations. Dad missed it entirely, too focused on gathering his business files and preparing for their discussion. But Mom noticed. I saw her glance between Terry and me with a confused expression that gradually shifted to something that looked like dawning understanding. After the meeting concluded and Terry was preparing to leave, he found a moment when my parents were temporarily in the kitchen to approach me in the hallway. I miss you, he said quietly, his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry. Would you like to spend the weekend at my cabin? We could have some real privacy, time to just be ourselves, also worrying about who might see us. Terry, be careful, I whispered back, glancing toward the kitchen. I think Mom is getting suspicious about us. I know. Maybe it's time we considered having a serious conversation with your parents about our relationship. Not yet, I said, panic fluttering in my chest. Please, just give me a little more time to figure out how to approach this. Terry reluctantly agreed, but I could see the frustration in his eyes. The secrecy was wearing on him as much as it was on me. Maybe more. He was used to being direct and honest in his dealings. I could tell that hiding our relationship was becoming increasingly difficult for him to maintain. That night, my fears were confirmed when Mom knocked on my bedroom door and entered with the serious expression she wore when she was about to have one of our important mother-son conversations. Roger, she said, settling onto the edge of my bed, I need to ask you something directly, and I want you to be honest with me. Are you involved in something more than a professional relationship with Terry? My heart stopped. Mom's intuition had always been eerily accurate, but I'd hoped I was being more careful about hiding my feelings. Mom, what do you mean? I asked, trying to sound innocent despite the guilt that was probably written all over my face. Honey, I'm your mother. I can tell when you have feelings for someone, the way you light up when they're mentioned, how you try a little harder with your appearance on days when you know you'll see them, the dreamy look you get when you think no one is paying attention. Mom's voice was gentle but firm. Terry is a good man, but this situation could be very complicated. I realized with a sinking feeling that our secret was about to be exposed, whether we were ready for it or not. The question now was whether my parents would be understanding about a situation that was undeniably complex and potentially problematic. I can see that you care about him, Mom continued, and from what I observed today, those feelings seem to be mutual. But we need to talk about this as a family before things go any further. Looking at my mother's concerned but loving expression, I knew she was right. The secret had become too heavy to carry, and it was time to face whatever consequences awaited us. The next day at the office, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Terry immediately noticed that something was wrong with me, probably because I could barely look him in the eye during our morning meeting and kept fidgeting with my pen like a nervous teenager. During lunch break, he called me into his office and closed the door, his expression serious and concerned. What's wrong, Roger? You've been acting distant all morning and you look like you didn't sleep last night. I told him about my conversation with Mom, watching as his expression shifted from concern to resignation to something that looked like determination. When I finished explaining, Terry was quiet for a long moment, staring out his office window at the city skyline below. Maybe it's time, he said finally, turning back to face me. I'm tired of hiding this, Roger. I want to be able to date you properly, openly, without feeling like we're doing something wrong. Terry, can you imagine Dad's reaction? His business partner dating his son? It could ruin your professional relationship, maybe even your friendship. Your father is a reasonable man, Terry said, though I could hear the uncertainty in his voice despite his confident words. If he sees that I genuinely care about you and that my intentions are serious, maybe he'll understand. But the decision was taken out of our hands. When I arrived home that evening, both Mom and Dad were waiting in the living room with the serious expressions that indicated a family meeting was about to take place. Roger, sit down, Dad said, his tone carefully neutral. We need to have a conversation. I perched on the edge of the sofa, my heart hammering as I waited for whatever was coming. Mom started, which somehow made it worse because she usually left the serious disciplinary conversations to Dad. I had a direct conversation with Terry today, she began, and my blood froze in my veins. He came by the office this afternoon and I asked him point blank about his relationship with you. What did he say? I managed to ask, though my voice came out as barely more than a whisper. The truth, Dad replied calmly, though I could see the tension in his shoulders, that he has genuine romantic feelings for you and that you've responded positively to his advances. I sat in silence, waiting for the explosion, the anger, the lecture about inappropriate relationships and poor judgment. Instead, Dad took a deep breath and continued in the same measured tone. Initially, I was shocked, he admitted. Terry is my trusted business partner, someone I consider not just a colleague but a friend. This situation was completely unexpected. But, Mom added. Terry handled the conversation very maturely. He assured me that he would never do anything to hurt you, and that his intentions toward you are completely serious. He asked for permission to date you officially. I was stunned. Terry had actually asked my parents for permission to date me. Like some kind of old-fashioned courtship ritual? He requested what? I asked, wondering if I'd misheard. He wants to court you properly, Dad said, and I could see the corner of his mouth twitching slightly, as if he was trying not to smile. With our knowledge and hopefully our blessing. I could hardly process what I was hearing. Are you both okay with this? Dad leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. Roger, I consider you an adult capable of making your own decisions about relationships. But I want you to be careful. Terry is older than you, more experienced in both business and life. Power dynamics in relationships can be complicated, especially when one person has significant professional authority over the other. I understand your concerns, Dad, I said, finding my voice again. But Terry isn't like that. He's been nothing but respectful and caring. He's never used his position to pressure me or make me feel uncomfortable. We've been watching, Mom said with a slight smile. And we can see that he treats you well. Terry asked if he could officially date you, with our permission and under certain conditions that we would all agree to. What kind of conditions? I asked, though I was beginning to feel hopeful rather than terrified. Complete professionalism at the workplace, Dad said firmly. No favoritism, no special treatment, no indication that your relationship extends beyond professional boundaries when you're at the office. And regular family dinners where we can get to know Terry as your boyfriend rather than just my business partner. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Not only were my parents not angry, but they were actually willing to support this relationship under reasonable conditions. You're both really okay with this? I asked again, needing to hear them confirm it. Honey, your happiness is what's important to us, Mom said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. If Terry makes you happy and treats you with respect, then we can learn to support this relationship. That evening, Terry came over for what he described as an official dinner. Nervous but confident, carrying flowers for Mom and a bottle of Dad's favorite wine. I could see the relief in his eyes when Dad welcomed him warmly and Mom treated him like she always had. Over dinner, Dad had a serious conversation with Terry about his intentions, his plans for the relationship, and his commitment to maintaining professional boundaries at work. Terry answered every question honestly and directly, making it clear that he understood the complexity of the situation and was willing to work within whatever parameters my parents felt comfortable with. When Terry finally kissed me goodnight at the end of the evening, officially in front of my parents, I realized that sometimes the best relationships do start in unexpected ways, and that love can overcome even the most complicated circumstances when handled with maturity and respect. No more secrets, Terry whispered against my lips as my parents discreetly gave us a moment of privacy in the hallway. Now I can love you properly the way you deserve to be loved. I smiled, feeling the weight of secrecy finally lift from my shoulders. Terry Mitchell, my father's business partner, was now officially my boyfriend, and surprisingly, everyone seemed to be okay with it. Looking back, I realized that sometimes the most unexpected connections turn out to be the most meaningful ones. What had started as an impossible attraction had become something real and lasting, built on honesty, respect, and the kind of love that was worth fighting for.